it's definitely something that, a lot of the projects we're involved in, are around a change and transformation
Mm,
nature, or, if you look at service design, that always requires multiple stakeholders, multiple
mm,
people involved to solve such a thing. And because there's so many people involved on both sides of the solution and trying to find a solution, or being exposed to the solution, they tend to be quite of a wicked nature. And I'm always trying to talk to organizations about what this actually means, because a lot of organizations don't seem to be aware of that. And taking some words from a paper you sent us on social construction of leadership, you say it's a naive assumption that we can render the context or situation transparent enough through scientific analysis. So that, and I think I've read something similar in Rittle's writing, where he said, scientific or engineering approach just doesn't cut it, or the way, or it's not the right approach to wicked problems. Can you elaborate on that a little bit more? I think you said something a little bit earlier, but can you elaborate a little bit more
Sure.
on?
This is basically an argument against contingency theory. So a contingency theory would be, so you tell me what kind of a problem you've got, and I'll tell you what to do about it. And I think that implies that we agree or can find out what the situation is. So if you take, for example, whether there were ever weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, if we do enough science, we can find this out. But actually, you can't find it out. These are political arguments, hypotheticals about whether there were or there weren't weapons of mass destruction. And the only real way to find out was to dig up the entire country of Iraq to look for them. And in the absence of that, you can't do it. So this is the equivalent of, when you look out of your window and you look at the world outside, which bit are you looking at? You can't possibly look at everything in your vision. It's not physically possible to do that. There are too many variables involved. There's too much information coming into your eye. So you just select a particular point. And the question is, which point are you selecting and why are you selecting that point? So when I'm looking out of my window now, I'm looking out of at an apple tree, but there are lots of trees around the apple tree. So why am I looking at the apple tree? And that implies that there's something about the way that we look at the world which is not rooted necessarily in the science of the externality. It's not objective. This is a kind of subjective thing. That for some reason, for whatever reason, I'm attracted to the apple tree and not everything else. And when you're trying to explain what's going on in the world, you can't explain everything in terms of everything. So this is quite an interesting issue about whether academics are too theoretical and what they should do is avoid theory and just describe the world. But this is a bit like saying, so how do we explain knife crime? Well, knife crime is a consequence of people carrying knives. But that isn't an explanation. That's just a description. The explanation for why knife crime occurs might go back into all kinds of issues about how the police treat people, how people end up in particular kinds of cultures where it's a kind of issue of masculine identity to carry a knife, or it's actually about self-defense, or it's about lack of education. There are hundreds and hundreds of possible variables in trying to explain why we end up with knife crime. And what an academic theory is trying to do is to say, okay, so there are hundreds of variables, which are the most likely, and it's these three are the most likely because theoretically this is what happens. And I think the issue of the social construction of leadership then implies that when somebody is trying to say something, what you have to think about is, so where's the theoretical origins of that? Where's the basis for saying that? And what's the theory for implying that if we separate by 2 meters, or we only have groups of six, or we don't go to the cinema, or we do wear face masks, what's the science behind this? And of course, what we've discovered in the pandemic and COVID-19 is that these are highly contested. And that's the point of the social construction argument, that these are always highly contested. And for a variety of reasons, we plump and find ourselves loyal to a particular group of theories, and quite often, what underlines our notions of truth is actually loyalty to some culture rather than loyalty to any objective truth or fact.